Okay, well, good morning, Professor. It is a pleasure to have you here today. I'm so happy that you accepted our request to meet and to speak. I'm currently working on a piece on radicalization and social integration, social rehabilitation. So I have here today with me. I will take a little time to just introduce you. So I have here today Professor Pedro Altungy, who is currently a research assistant and professor in the personality assessment and clinical treatment department of the psychology college in the Universidad Cuptul-
Complutense.
Complutense de Madrid.
A little bit tricky.
He holds a Master's of Science degree in clinical psychology and is currently preparing his PhD dissertation on personality and transdiagnostic variables. His main field of expertise is in the psychological consequences of terrorism, having psychologically assessed and treated Spanish terrorism victims since 2015. Since 2018, he is also the president of the International Association of Applied Psychology Division 15 and is part of its task force on terrorism and peace building team, having specialized in radicalization processes and psychological factors behind the path towards terror. So thank you so much again, Professor, for being here. We are very excited to hear your views. I will ask just a couple of questions and then feel free to also expand on anything or add anything that you find relevant. So firstly, if you could just tell me a bit of why you got interested in this field. It's very interesting. I mean, I would also love to hear about your experience firsthand with victims. So what got you into this field? As we were speaking before earlier, my take on radicalization before I started working on this piece, I think it's very commonplace to think of radicalization as a very linear thing. And the more that I research, and I'm very excited to hear your views, the more that we see that it's varied. There are many layers and there are many paths, both to social integration and to radicalization. So I would love to hear your thoughts first on why you got interested and what's your general take for an introduction on this topic.
So thank you very much, Barbara, for this opportunity for being here with you, for having this interview with the Tactics Institute. For what I've seen, you're doing a very interesting research, and your topic for the paper and for your research, Barbara, seems very interesting to me as well. Why did I start uh, researching or being interested in this topic? As you mentioned, I started my professional path in the world of research and clinical psychology, working with terrorist victims in Spain, both from Islam terrorism, but also from ETA terrorism, which sadly has been historically the most important one due to the number of victims that it caused during the more, because ETA was active for more than 4 decades. So even though nowadays it's true that Islamist terrorism, it seems to be the most important one, let's say. But here in Spain, sadly, we had a very long history with terrorism, for the good and for the bad. So I started working with them. It was and it's still being a very interesting field of development, both in the personal and in the professional field, because you learn a lot from them, from their experiences, and treating them. It's very enriching, I would say. But I started to get more curious and curious for the other side, right? Because I was always watching and I was always dealing with the victims. But a question that they always asked, or very often they asked, was why? Why somebody decided to do this to me, to my husband, to my daughter, to how is it possible? Is because mankind is evil? Is because there are some bad apples? Why does it happen? And even though each person has its own reply to these questions, I thought it was interesting to try to, well, to get more knowledge about that why, because I wanted to help the victims better if I could. So that's why I started also to work together and to collaborate with the IAP Task Force on Terrorism and Peace Building, which for me, I had to admit, it was very easy because the director of that task force is also a director of my research team in the Universidad Complutense, the professor Maria Paz García Vera. And I was also involved in IAP activities. So it was like, how could I miss this chance, right? So that was the moment we started to look more into the causes and the reasons why regular people, let's say normal people like you and me, could end up being terrorists in the full sense of the word. And thus we have our main focus of research has been reviewing all the existing literature currently, scientific psychological literature, dealing with that idea, dealing with the path towards radicalization, and why somebody would become a terrorist in that sense. And it's what we've been doing since 2018, and we plan to publish some results of our reviews and meta-analysis shortly. But so far, I will be very glad to discuss with you any topics that you may find interesting in that sense.
Great, great. Thank you so much for this introduction. It's very interesting indeed to work on the victim side and then start understanding, hey, there's another side that I need to explore to also complement it. Very interesting indeed. So, I mean, firstly, then I would like to hear um, from your perspective of the clinical point of view, a psychosocial point of view, that perspective of radicalization. So, I mean, as noted in many reports recently, Europol also, lone wolf attacks have been increasing. So, if you could please discuss a bit this dichotomy of sorts, or how you would phrase it, between ideological radicalization, psychosocial factors leading to it, this many variants, and if the different path to it leads to different results?
Mhm. Well, first of all, I would say that even though the frame is always pointed into ideology, ideology would be one of the last steps in the, as Mohadam called, the staircase towards radicalization. It's not the beginning, but maybe the end of that staircase. From the clinical psychological point of view, first of all, I would like to highlight and to remark that people who become terrorists, they are not insane. They have no mental problems. They usually, if, especially the people, sorry, who are behind the attacks, who plan them, who do all the infrastructure and so on, they are very intelligent and they have all their mental capacities perfectly intact. So it's not a matter of a psychological disorder or being insane, let's say in plain words. It has to do more with the psychosocial side of that person. And for that, it's very important to remember that we are social beings and that we have necessities, basic ones, but also higher ones. And for that, it's important to remember the Maslow pyramid, which is a very popular concept, which was developed by a psychosocial psychologist, Maslow. And it was a pyramid like the nutrition score pyramid. It's the same idea, where in the base are the basic psychological needs, which are to be fit, to be able to breathe, the health, and to have, let's say, a place for dwelling. That would be the basic necessities. But once we start to get towards the top of the pyramid, we start to find other needs, which, even though they are not basic, they are important too. And there are needs like self accomplishment, like social accomplishment, for example, self esteem too. And what about that part of social or self accomplishment? What happens when somebody lacks or feel that he or she has lost that ability or that capacity to feel accomplished? Then it appears psychological stress, as it could happen with any of us. A very quick example. Let's imagine that we are fired from our job. Let's imagine that we have a quarrel with a friend, with our partner, and we split up. How do we feel? We feel psychological pain. We feel bad, and we try to do something in order to recover from that situation. So these examples could be one of the examples that could be the first step toward radicalization, because radicalization doesn't mean by itself that you are going to end up as a terrorist. It means that your mind, your mindset, it's focused towards one only path. It depends which path you start in that moment. So what happens is that that person, and I would like to highlight a concept which was created by Eric Ruglansky, who is studying that topic of radicalization since the 90s, which is the importance for significance quest. We need to feel significant, both in the personal and in the social level. But what happens when we lose that signification? That signification could be lost or could be altered due to three reasons. First of all, because we lose it. Like, as we said, let's say that I've been very involved in my community and I have some problems with the people who are in there and I get expelled from it. Then my vision of myself inside that community is completely lost. Thus, part of me has been lost. Who I am, that kind of personal or existential crisis, let's say, even though you don't need to be very, very, very existential, but even though you feel a little bit at lost because your significance has disappeared. That one reason. Second, that you can anticipate that your significance, your social and personal importance is going to be lost. Maybe I'm still in that community. Maybe I'm inside that community, but I'm starting to feel that there are being some problems that, so then I would like to secure my position there. So for that, maybe I start to do some different things, which I will discuss later. Or third of all, which is a very human one, is that I feel that I can increase my level of significance, or that my current significance level is not appropriate enough for what I think I value or I can do. So these 3 points could be or would be the starting point toward radicalization. But that alone doesn't mean nothing. Because as I've said in these examples and in many others, it happens to almost everyone in at some point of our lives, and we don't become radicalized in any sense, usually. We just go through a bad period of our lives, and then we start over, we start with all the things, and that would be all. But then it appears the second point in that staircase, which would be, well, but there's another human need, very important one, which is transcendence. We need to feel that we are more than ourselves, that we can live something here, that what we do in our world, let's say more specifically in our community, in our neighborhood, in our workplace, that it means something. It's not just that I go there, I go to my workplace, I go to my community center, or I hang out with my friends and that's all. No, we would like, which is normal, we tend to think that it means something, both for us, but for the other people. And that this message, or, well, what we do, it will be there even though we are not present at the moment, but also in a more existential or more future perspective when we die. We like to feel that our life has been useful, let's say. And what do we do for that? Well, we develop ourselves both in a personal and professional way. But what happens when our way of achieving or going towards that transcendency disappears in the same examples as I've said before. I have a lack, a psychological lack, which is fundamental. So I need to replace it. I need to still feel that my life, that it works, that it works being lived, that I'm going to do something useful. And again, so far, no problem. It seems like something normal. But here, it's when it depends on where you focus or what do you start to do in order to gain back that significance and that transcendency. It is here where the turning point starts in being or in possibly becoming a terrorist, or maybe someone who starts to be very involved in an NGO, let's say, or in a social movement. Because if you analyze and what we've seen in our reviews, is that the reasons behind someone would become, let's say, an activist, a social activist, an active member of an NGO, or that someone who starts to go more often to his or her community center in order to help people who are going through difficult times. The reasons behind that involvement are not very different from the reasons behind the involvement of a person in an extremist group. It's more or less the same. I feel at lost. I feel that for whatever reasons my life has lost all that I knew beforehand, that my possibility of transcendency, of being more than myself, has been cut off completely. So I wanted to regain it, to get it back. What happens that usually in our communities we have resources, and when I speak about communities, I speak also about our friends, our social network. Well, we have resources that lead us towards those more social or pro-social paths. And they say, you feel blue, you are kind of bad because you get fired, you don't know what to do with your time, even though I understand you did a lot for your business and then you've been sacked. Oh, it sucks, yes, but well, I have a friend, he started in this NGO, they are working with kids, and he also went through a very bad time, but he told me that it helped a lot. Oh yeah, well, I will try. Or people starting in sports that they've never went out running or nothing. They were coach potatoes, and suddenly out of the blue, it's like they run marathons and they go to everything. It's why.
And is it since the reasonings, as you well explained, are very similar to between becoming a social activist in NGO, going more to a community center, to church, to or feeling an attachment suddenly to an extremist group, is there any possibility to profile? Do you see any common factors, or it's just a matter of individual way to deal with this need for transcendence and significance?
Uh, for what we've seen, it depends more on the chances that you have in front of you. I mean, if you are living in a uh, marginalized neighborhood or area, probably you won't have as many as opportunities for getting attached or involved in social environments than in, let's say, as it is happening nowadays with not only Islamist extremism, but also far right and far left extremism. As we've seen in the States right now, in the previous month, what have happened? Why there are so many people in the United States that suddenly become part of far right extremist groups? Is because many of them, they belong to very isolated communities in the inside of the United States, not in golden California or New York or Washington, which is what comes in our minds when we think about the United States. Oh, so marvelous, so modern. So no, most of them we know that come from the inner core of the United States, which are, as I said, kind of isolated population, population who nobody think about them. And suddenly it appears someone called Trump in that case, saying that I think about you, you are important, you can do something greater. Analyze Trump discourse. It's targeted towards these people who are nobody and who suddenly feel that they can be someone.
Yeah. I I think it's very interesting that you started to make this comparison because for me, I also wanted to touch upon this. Um, there is a very fine line in my view. I would love to have you also inform us all more between, yeah, so we have the uh, I- Islam extremism, jihadi extremism, all these global terrorist movements. But then we also have a very present, especially nowadays, and you mentioned a very good example that's very pressing, I think, for everyone, a far right extremism. But also in Europe, Spain, for example, also has some, separatist movements that are quite extremist as well. Not just Spain, but that's your country, which is why I mentioned, and also far left extremism. So I wanted to also hear your views on this, if we can put them in the same bag at all, if we cannot, how to approach them as different extremisms, and perhaps most importantly, the after. In terms of social integration and rehabilitation, it's also difference there. If you could expand a bit on that, and then giving us a segue into our next topic of rehabilitation.
Certainly. Uh, in order to address them, I think that we should differentiate the external part of the core from the inner part. So, which are the differences? Differences are ideology. And that ideology would be the external core, the one that we all see and that they themselves probably perceive because they get their self identification from that ideology. So they acknowledge themselves as a Spanish separatist, as Al Qaeda members, or as far right movement, whatever person, and I adhere to these views. But that's the external part. The common point, it doesn't matter which group you belong, is what we were discussing before, is that why did you start there? Why did you get involved with that group? It was because you got detached from your social life, from your community. And it just happened that at that moment, in this and in that place, you were to find this group. This was the very first group who welcomed you. Well, it was the far left point. I mean, at that point, obviously, you are a little bit biased toward going through one path or another. Let's say that before getting detached or before having that stressful moment in my life, I was very sure that I was very politically involved and that I would never vote for the right or for the left, for example. So obviously, I'm not going to go towards the other extreme. But if I were a neutral, politically, for example, speaking person, the first group that would take me in would be the one for me. And the same with religion. If I'm a kind of religious person, probably I will tend to go towards a religious community rather than towards a political community. Because, well, even though I feel at lost, I try to regain my path going through the paths that more or less I knew. But that would be uh, not the most important thing. The most important thing is that detachment, that loss of significance, and going through, as I've said, right, the following my personality and my previous myself, I most probably go towards one group or the other, but that would be all, and that would be the common point, and that would be the point that should be more importantly addressed. Ideology, the external core, the taking into account that you belong to a religious extremist group or to a political extremist group, it's important in order to the first approach, because I want to break your walls, and your walls are these ideologically walls. But that alone won't do anything. we couldn't stop there, because usually, as far as we have seen, but for a few examples which have worked very well, but usually all rehabilitation programs are targeted or are focused on ideology, in trying to, they consider that that person has been brainwashed by the group and by its ideology, and the task of the rehabilitation is to uh, take back that kind of brainwash, which is, yeah, in part it's true, but it's not the core thing. Because, well, yes, perfect. Now I have understood that religious extremism is not the path. Well, but I'm in the same starting place than when I started this path. I feel at lost. And even though worse, because I'm double lost. I'm lost from the beginning and now again because so I was convinced that joining Al Qaeda was going to be my salvation, and I found a family there. And well, you opened my eyes, and I realized that no, that they were a bunch of liars, that they only thought of themselves. Great. And what about me? What do I do now? And that's where rehabilitation programs and psychosocial intervention should be more coachings, not to leave that person on his own thinking, oh, well, he or she has a knowledge that this group was very bad indeed. Well, we've done our job here. Let's move on. No, because that person, it's even worse than in the beginning. And there, it's, for example, in that point, it's where a autonomous terrorist or lone wolf, but I rather prefer to use the word autonomous, because lone wolf, it's, for me, it seems like it's someone completely detached from all the world that suddenly out of the blue decides to take a knife and start stabbing people. And it's not that. It's the same as a regular terrorist or extremist. The difference is that nowadays, due to the social media, the internet, and all these communication possibilities, allows that I don't need to properly go to a community or to a place, have a meeting with everyone else, and then commit myself. No, I can do all these things just through social media, and then feel, as again, I link it with far right or far left extremism, I link myself with all these other people who are on Facebook, on Twitter, and I say, they understand me. And suddenly, all my world, all the information that I get comes from people who think exactly the same as I do. So it reinforces my chain of thoughts. And you say, yeah, but a lot of people is there and not all of them start violent actions. It's true, but it's just a matter of statistic and probabilities. The more people you have, the more probabilities you have for just one of them to decide to take a step further.
And what would you say and think is lacking in current rehabilitation programs? Because also they vary a lot depending from country to country, and I know their own experience with extremism, be it political or ideological. Um, in Spain, for example, where terrorism has had, yeah, so ETA was very present, as you mentioned in the beginning, for many decades. Now it's jihadi terrorism has been a bit more on the rise. But what would you say is lacking in Spain and in Europe in particular in rehabilitation programs, or namely social integration? Because as you say, sometimes in rehabilitation, okay, the brainwash is gone, let's say, but then the lack is still there. So what would you say would be best practices, or what's your take on social integration?
First of all, I think that in order to achieve a proper reintegration, it's a community and society target or effort, not something that should be done only by security forces or the state. Because I can be, let's imagine, and it's what happened here in Spain with ETA, for example. Why they did disappear? They disappeared when they felt and when it was obvious for everyone that they lacked social support, any social support, that, as I said, their transcendency and significance wouldn't be achieved towards what they've been doing, because society told them, no, that's enough. That not, at least that's not the way of achieving what we want, named independence in that case. What has happened, that social support, for example, that ETA previously had in Spain in order to commit violent actions, moved towards political ways. So they lost all the support. And that's why, let's imagine that I'm a psychologist working with these terrorists. What I'm going to do if they know that a lot of people support them? I'm not going to do anything, because they are going to feel that they are doing something. They see themselves as martyrs. So there's nothing to do there, or there's very little to do, but for try to avoid as many or as much damage as possible. But probably you are not going to rehabilitate them, because you need society to accept and to understand why these people decided to start this path and to become extremists in any sense. First, you need to understand them if you want to take them back properly, say. And that's an effort that I think that states should make in order to, well, have more an educative approach towards these people. I'm not going to say that we should see them as victims, because that's not the point, but more a point of understanding. And understanding something, it's not respecting it, it's not sharing their views, it's just understanding. And then we could help both in rehabilitation and also in avoiding as much as possible people getting in these groups. How? Because if society is more open to integrate people who are suffering from a personal significance lost, in that sense of significance guest, or in that loss of transcendency, it's more probable, as I said before, that people go through pro-social pathways instead of violent or extremist ones. And the same for rehabilitation. They need to see that after being in jail, because if you are working with them, it's probably because they have been prosecuted and they are in prison, that they have a life afterwards, that they still can do something, that they are valuable. And it's something that we, not only the state, but we as a society need to tell them. It's something that, for example, why, if we take a deeper look in, for example, now with in Europe, with Islamist extremism, Islamist terrorism, the lone wolves, the young people that become terrorists and perpetrate the attacks. What is the common point? And it's usually said that no, they come from marginalized areas. It's not only that, because not all of them comes from low income families. Some of them are medium class, and it's white, and they are in regular schools, in regular neighborhoods. So why? The reason behind is that usually, if we look these people, they are sons of immigrants. So they were born in the European country, but the people from the country doesn't welcome them. They see them as foreigners. So they couldn't identify themselves, let's say, for example, in Spain, with the attackers the terrorists in Barcelona, in Las Ramblas attacks. They didn't see themselves as 100% Spaniards, even though they were born here and raised here. But society, or part of society, told them, no, you are not a Spaniard, you are Moroccan. Okay, no problem. But what happens that they looked towards their Moroccan families or all the people in Morocco, and they told them, no, no, you are not Moroccan, you're a Spaniard. You were born there, you were raised there. Well, yes, your roots are Moroccan, but you are not Moroccan anymore. So that person said, so I live in Spain in a Moroccan family, let's say, as an example, but I'm neither Spaniard nor Moroccan. And it's not a matter of nationality. It's all what it's below it or behind it is that I'm not accepted. I don't belong anywhere. But, and that's the starting point. But then a friend of mine told me, you should come with me to the mosque. You should come with me to hear this imam he has a lovely speak. Of course, in that very first moment, they are not thinking in killing people. And if somebody would told them, you are going to end up killing people, they probably said, no, 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 what are you saying? You're crazy. No, of course not, because it's a step by step. And a lot of people in this situation, many young people, for example, in this situation of belonging nowhere or to no one, they get into these groups, but not all of them become violent extremists. The majority of them stop in the first step of, oh yeah, well, I feel good, but I still know that it's not right. Or, well, I think they are talking only metaphors, which is okay, but again, it's a matter of probabilities. You only need 10 people to go towards the next step, and then just 3 people, and then just 1 people for committing an attack, and that's the lone wolf, for example.
Um, I guess I just have some final questions that I would like to ask before we finish off. But my main one would be if you could touch a little bit upon, you mentioned, of course, these lone wolf or autonomous terrorists, as you prefer to call them, and how, of course, then we also have actual returned terrorist fighters, which, the EU has action plans against it and networks to prevent for counterterrorism, anti-terrorism measures. How do you see the risk between autonomous terrorists, for example, this example you mentioned of
Mhm.
a normal person that may feel at a loss or may feel not accepted, and the risk of returned foreign fighters, terrorist fighters? Do you see them as similar risks in society, different?
I, I feel they are the same risk because the foreign fighters left for the same reasons that the autonomous terrorists do their attacks. So we should identify the reasons why they did it. Again, named what happened in your life. Why did you felt at lost? Why did you feel that your life at some point wasn't worth? And then work with these people in order to both identify that point and for them to acknowledge that they went through that phase. For example, with the foreign fighter in returning, I think it's a good policy because we should reintegrate them in our societies. But for them, again, the path would be the same, is saying, okay, let's sit here. Of course, it could be a matter of a lot of work, right? But simplifying it, let's sit here together. So I'm not going to criticize because if I criticize or if I go against your views, you are going to close yourself and we are going to do nothing. So let's forget for a moment that you are a terrorist, that you went to Syria to fight, that you support ISIS. Let's forget about it. You are a person. What happened in your life before going there? Why did you decide to join ISIS? We could learn a lot from it, from the reasons behind, and all the researchers in that way have shown that the common link is that loss of significance and of transcendency. And then work with that person in that point, not in the ideological way, which could be worked later, because as I said, it's not the core, it's the external part. So let's, in a psychological therapy, work with, you decided to go there, what happened? Okay, so you felt that it was your best decision. Maybe you felt that way back then. But was it? Were there another alternatives? Now, looking back at it, I'm not, again, in order to do that rehabilitation, we need a lot of acceptance, we need a lot of understanding. Again, understanding is not respecting or sharing, it's just understanding. And let's say, okay, would you do it differently had you got the chance now? I'm not going to criticize now the group because it's out of context at the moment. We will do it later. But oh no, yes, I did it because, as I said, I felt it happened, for what I've read at least, maybe because it has been more research, for example, with German or British people who went to Iraq and Syria. And again, they felt completely detached from their communities. We should address that. We should, in coming back, we should address, you felt like that? What can we do? What would you like if we could? And then, when we have that person in that point, only then should we move towards, what do you think now about the ideology? Do you really think that it's a good point to kill innocent people for God or for whatever reason? Yes, but in a Socratic approach.
Yes, right.
Because if
Very,
not, I'm going to defend. Let's say if you are, for example, let's say, I don't know, uh, vegetarian, and I start to think it's very bad. It's very bad for your health. Oh man, you are crazy. How do you feel? You feel attacked. So you are going to defend yourself, and you are not going to listen to the reasons, which probably are very good ones, but you are not going to listen to the reasons why, let's say in that example, that meat it's useful for our system. Because the only thing that you are listening from me is that you're crazy. And all the other things is like, I don't give a shit. So saving the distances, but is that same idea. You don't want that people to feel attacked. You want to feel him or her understood.
yes,
Then we
indeed.
could work.
Very interesting, and the examples of more day-to-day life are also very good for us to understand it a bit better. Well, we're running out of time, so we should close off soon. But are there any last comments you'd like to make on the topic, or last mentions of findings, or anything that you would like to reiterate?
Well, the only thing maybe is the common point or the linking point, because being a victim and becoming a terrorist. And we can see that, for example, in many Eastern countries who are suffering from civil unrest, even worse. Let's imagine that I'm living myself, for example, in Palestine. What happens and the high support that groups like Hamas have there. Why? I'm a kid. The only thing I've always known is war, bombs, tanks. I'm a victim. And we would acknowledge that. That kid is a victim. But also that kid will grow up and he will feel again that he's not significant. Not only that, that his community is not significant. They are nothing, simplifying. And then someone comes in and say, you're right, we are nothing, but we can become something greater, something very important. It's interesting what you're saying. Tell me more. And then you have to start the path. So a person who has been a victim, clearly, without doubts, can become a terrorist. Not because he's mad or insane. Even in a rational reasoning, it's understood. I mean, it's normal. The point is the moral and ethical background on doing so, but in a just logical and purely rational development, it's like, why not? So
Indeed.
that would be very interesting. Also, if we want to prevent more extremism, we should address or we should avoid people being in situations very prolific for becoming an extremist in any sense of the word.
Indeed. Thank you very much for well, these last notes, and for in general for this great interview. It was very interesting to hear your thoughts, your research, and yes, your take on this very sensitive topic, which I think everyone needs to have a bit of more enlightenment on. Well, that will be it for me. I take my time just to now say a final thank you, and and for accepting this invitation.
Thank you very much, Barbara. It's been a pleasure, and I always want to thank you for doing this job, because I think it's very interesting to address this very important topic from all the different perspectives possible in order to advance toward a better end. So thank you very much.
Indeed.